Yes, yes, y'all. It's iconic, and we're coming at you today with a 5-star gem tier list. Let's go. So, I wanted to give my rankings on some of the 5-star gems inside of Diablo Immortal. I haven't done any sort of a tier list yet, so I wanted to bring that for you guys this time. And what better way to start this off than with the 5-star gem tier list? Quick disclaimer here. I didn't actually make this list. I hopped onto the website. This one was already ready to go. However, it is missing the new Spiteful Blood gem. I'll just tell you guys right now, I think it's trash anyway. So who knows if it even really needs to be on this list. And then for whatever reason, Mother's Lament is also on this list. And I'll go ahead and rank that one too as well for you guys last. So what we're going to do here is start off with PvE. And the first one that we have is Blessing of the Worthy. Now I'm going to put this one into A tier. And I do think there's some caveats to it though. For the Blessing of the Worthy gem, it is going to be a little bit specific. I think it works better for melee classes than range classes, but for PvE, if you're a melee class, you're typically going to be in range of a pack or a boss when you get hit and this thing goes off. There was some controversy surrounding this gem in the beginning, and that was due to the text changing on it, where it used to say it would go off for your full health, whatever your full health that you had was. And then it changed to your remaining health. So you could have almost no health and it would go off and it really wouldn't do anything. But I think now it's a little bit better than where it was in the beginning of the game when this was happening. And the reason for that is our health has gone through the roof inside of Diablo Immortal. So even if you don't have your full HP, like you're still going to have a pretty gigantic health pool to do a lot of damage with this gem. And again, I think this is a little more specific for melee. When I've used it for range classes, I always feel like it's going off and I'm nowhere near a pack or even sometimes a boss. So for melee, it's A tier. If I had to save for ranged, I'd probably knock it down into the B tier section. But overall, pretty decent gem. Now this one I have a little bit of bias towards. I really love this gem. Bottled Hope. Oops. Bottled Hope for me is going to be an S tier gem, and I think this one's a little bit specific as well too. But for me personally, I'm always doing buffs with my characters. It's something that I realized was a little bit broken inside of the game. I feel like is beneficial effect duration, attack speed, and then buffs. So anything that I can do centered around buffs is very helpful for me. So this is going to increase your damage as well as your speed. And at higher ranks, I mean, it's really one that you don't want to pass up on. And most characters have multiple buffs, so I don't think that's a problem for anyone. Next up is Blood-Soaked Jade. And this one goes S tier, and it's primarily not because it's the best gem in the game. I know some people will label it that way, or like you have to have a Blood-Soaked Jade. I think it's actually kind of mediocre, to be honest with you, in terms of like what it's actually doing compared to some other gems that you can get. However, the reason it's S tier is it works with every single class, and there's not really any condition like you've got to wait 20 seconds for it to proc. It's just going to be based on you having your full health. Like there is a condition to it, but it's increasing your damage, it's increasing your movement speed, it's actually giving you a little bit of damage mitigation when you get to lower health. So overall, you get a lot of positive effects from Blood-Soaked Jade. The next one up is Chip of the Stone Flesh. And while I think this one actually has a really good damage output, right now I'm talking specifically for PvE. And I think because you have to tailor it a lot, Chip of the Stone Flesh is going to be based on doing total loss of control. So you have to be stunning your enemy, freezing your enemy, fearing your enemy, anything like that where the character completely loses control is when Chip of the Stone Flesh is going to proc. And in terms of PvE content, this isn't going to work on the bosses. And for packs, I mean, yes, you could proc it on them and then you're able to just leave the pack, like they're going to pretty much explode and die. But again, having to build around it, you're probably not building your highest damage dealing build that you can. if you're centering it around Chip of the Stone Flesh. PvP is a different story, but right now we're just talking PvE. Concentrated Will, I'm going to go ahead and line this one up right beside Chip of the Stone Flesh. I'm not a big fan of it. The damage output isn't great. I know, again, at higher ranks, I think it probably really does scale up really well. But from what I've seen when I've used it, it just doesn't hit all that hard. And because you're doing dashes, it's also another specific gem that you have to build around. And building around those dashes, the way that it works is when you dash, you have a little angel or ghost figure that pops out, and it's gonna shoot where you dash to. So if an enemy is no longer there, or you didn't quite get your dash where you wanted to, you're not gonna hit anything with Concentrated Will. So I feel like it has a really wonky hitbox, and I think there's definitely better gems. It's cheaper resonance, however. Sometimes I've seen where the prices on them are a little inflated, but for the most part, it is cheap resonance, so it does have that going for it. But I would kind of put it right with Chip of the Stone Flesh for PvE. After that, we have Echoing Shade, which I'm also going to put into the B tier. I've used this one for quite some time. I liked it in terms of just the what you can see and what you can get from the gem. Like seeing your character multiple times running behind you is pretty cool. But the big issue for me in PvE is they don't keep up with you. They're not as fast as your character, so they're always lagging behind. If you're farming, they're like a pack behind you. If you're running through a dungeon, they're usually nowhere to be found until you have to slow up and hit a boss. They can do pretty decent chip damage, and when they crit, they do actually hit fairly hard. So it's not that it's a complete trash gem, but I do think there's better options than Echoing Shade. So I'm gonna put that one in B tier for now. Frozen Heart, I'm also gonna put into B tier. You really don't need this for PvE content whatsoever. I think we'd all agree that the PvE content is fairly easy in the game at this point. If you have the combat rating, you're not really going to struggle with it. So having a defensive gem for PvE isn't necessary when you could really have a damage amping gem in that slot instead. I will also point out though, I know on my server, I don't know about everywhere, but this is one of the cheaper gems too as well. So in terms of cheap resonance, not a bad gem either. Gloom Cask, I'm gonna put this one in the A tier. I've had a ton of fun using Gloom Cask. It doesn't work for every class, but for demon hunters, for wizards, Blood Knight right now, I would say it's okay for Blood Knight. I've used it on Monk as well, which again wasn't the best, but it adds something additional to your primary attacks, and it makes them viable. It definitely makes them have a much greater damage output than what they normally would. And for the classes that can really utilize it, Demon Hunter and Wizard, I mean, I would say it's S tier for those classes. But looking at it overall, most classes, I think it's going to land into the A tier. Next up, Hellfire Fragment. So this one, I use it, so maybe I'm a little bit biased, but it is, again, also cheap resonance. I think it's a B tier gem. If I was just using my bias, I mean, I'd probably say maybe an A. But I think it hits harder than what people give it credit for, again, especially if it crits when it goes off. But there is a completely better version of this gem, which is kind of knocking it down a peg for me. But yeah, it's not anything to write home about. A lot of times you won't notice that it's happening or going off when it goes off. But if you're hitting an enemy with 3 consecutive fireballs or a pack of enemies, like, it's just giving you that little more extra oomph, I would say. Howler's Call here, we're also going to put into the B tier. I know we've got a lot of 5-star gems in the B tier. Does that make sense? But for PvE content, I think it's a little bit inconsistent. It's kind of a very similar story to where you're going to be procking this thing and it goes off and you may be done with the pack and it procs for no reason, or the pack is almost dead. It does hit very hard, that one wolf that comes out. I mean, it hits pretty hard, especially again when it crits. So it's not like it's all bad. However, the inconsistencies with it, I think, are what would lead me to put it into the B tier. Now, I'm also going to say, I know I've been going for a little bit, but these are my opinions, so don't flame me in the comments. I've used basically all of these gems at one point or another, some more extensively than others, but I've definitely had my shot pretty much to try them all out. And this is my assessment of them. So let me know what you guys think, but don't be flaming me if you think something completely different. And then for Phoenix Ashes, I'm going to go ahead and put this down in the C tier for PvE. I mean, this one really isn't necessary. Again, it's kind of the similar story to Frozen Heart, but even worse because of how long of a cooldown it has. But you don't need to be resurrected in PvE. You don't need an extra shield when you resurrect yourself. Like, it's unnecessary for PvE content. Seeping Bile, for me, this one is an S tier. I think some people may actually probably put it in A tier, but the reason I think it's an S tier has a little more to do around with my use of it. Having Pain Clasp, and then using Banco Devise for my set piece every once in a while. Having something additional that can do that continual damage. Seeping Bile will proc it. Any type of burn, bleed, poisons will proc it. So I get a lot of utility out of this, and then it goes off more than you think. I know the description says it's 2 or 4% that it goes off and applies the poison. Certain skills I've noticed seem to do it basically consistently all the time. I feel like maybe it's channeled abilities, but I've noticed like Wizard's Disintegrate Beam seems to always proc Seeping Bile. So I think it's definitely, even for PvE and S tier gem, you can get it on a pack and you can walk away. They're gonna die. Very good gem. Starfire Shard, I'm gonna pop this one into the A tier. It has S tier potential, and when it hits and you do what you want to do with it, it hits hard. It's one of the hardest hitting gems I feel like in the game. But I do also have that inconsistency feeling with it, that a pack could be gone. It is really good for bosses, but for just regular overworld day-to-day type activities, it definitely will proc when you don't expect it to, and it kind of goes into an area where you've already pretty much defeated enemies. So in that regard, I think there's a couple of better options that I would get before Starfire for PvE specifically, but it can definitely be like your 4th, 5th, 6th gem. It could definitely be your 7th or 8th gem. There's room for it in your builds for sure. And then we have Zwinson's Haunting. I've always had a bad taste in my mouth for this gem, and I feel like it's because Blizzard gives this to me all the time. Blizzard, stop giving me Zwinson's Hauntings. I'm not even kidding you. I've ranked this thing up to rank 5. I've crushed it. I've ranked it back up to rank 4, crushed it. Ranked it back up to rank 4, crushed it. If I just would have kept it, I probably would have had a rank 7 by now almost. But for me, it's a C tier gem. And it's the exact same reason as the other ones. It procs when you kill an enemy, and if you're killing an enemy, typically all the other enemies are dead or close to dying too as well. It's just how your damage works in Diablo Immortal. So a lot of times you're not hitting anything when this procs. It can take out some decent health when it does hit and proc right, but I feel like it's very inconsistent. But it's also another one of those gems that are cheap resonance. It could potentially be the cheapest gem on your server, so keep that in mind. It's not all bad, but I don't like it. And then last up here, again, I'm not sure why this made it to the tier list here, but we've got Mother's Lament, and I'm actually going to put that into our S tier category. Even though it's not a 5-star gem, it's a 2-star gem. I feel like it has 5-star capabilities, that it's one of the best in the game. You need a damage amping gem to go along with it. I tell everybody that, like, that's a thing for me. You want something like a Pain Clasp or Power and Command or Blood Soaked Jade or Bottled Hope, or something to go along with it. But as long as you have that damage amping gem to go with it, this thing is a one-man army. It really is a very powerful gem. And then I'm going to move around some of these categories for PvP here real quick. So Starfire Shard, we're going to move up into the S tier category. It is an absolute monster inside of PvP. It could be potentially one of the best PvP gems right now. Chip of the Stone Flesh. I'm going to move this from B tier to A tier. If we're talking Necros specifically, it's an S tier gem. Like, Necros get so much use out of Chip of the Stone Flesh inside of PvP. However, for most classes, again, I think it is very specific where you have to build around it. And if you do, you're going to see some big benefit out of PvP, but there's other things that I would definitely put before it. Phoenix Ashes, I'm going to bump that from C to B tier. Again, the cooldown on it is so long that it's definitely one of those gems that's like, for a barb, it's awesome. Because it gives them another chance with Undying Rage and with their Gladiator and with Phoenix Ashes that they can stay alive for a long time with this gem. But anybody else, I don't really think it has that much utility for. Frozen Heart, we're going to move into the A tier for PvP. And this one, any sort of defense that you can bring into PvP, I think is definitely very helpful. This thing isn't going to change your gameplay or change your life, but it may give you that extra little bit to hang on when you've got Seeping Bile on you, or just give you that extra split second that you need to get away. So again, I wouldn't classify it as like a must-have per se, but if you do have it and you can make room for it, it's definitely a good gem for PvP. Now I'm going to actually drop down Bottled Hope from S tier to A tier, and the reason that I'm doing that one is the Cycle of Strife debuff does decrease this to the point where it's not as effective as you think it normally would be, unfortunately. So this one does go down, and the only reason I don't put Blood-Soaked Jade there is because movement speed is always great inside of Battlegrounds, and you are, even though it's being reduced, you are going to have that with no sort of conditions that you need to apply with Blood-Soaked Jade. Seeping Bile, we all know about that one. If you have high potency and you get Seeping Bile on someone, they're not going anywhere. It's definitely going to take them out. Mother's Lament, getting that extra crit chance in PvP is well worth it. Everything else I think kind of sits where I have it still inside of PvP. But let me know if you guys have any questions. So I think for our next tier list, we're probably going to look at the classes, and now that we have a new class, just kind of break down where everybody falls and kind of do a good breakdown of that. So as always, hit me up in the comments below. Let me know what you think. Do you agree, disagree? And I know you guys know what to do. I don't have to say it. So I'll catch you on the next one. Peace. Real quick, I didn't even notice it till the end here. I'm not sure when his face popped up, but shout out to Misery Hates Company. He's another Diablo Immortal content creator. I'm assuming this is his tier list that he made for other people to use inside a tier maker here. So yeah, want to give him credit for that. I just saw this one had all the gems that I wanted to talk about. So threw that in there, but yeah, shout out to Misery Hates Company. I forgot to as well that Spiteful Blood wasn't on here. I mentioned that in the beginning, and I don't like it at all. I'd probably put it B or C tier, somewhere kind of in between there, but I think most people would agree with me on that one. It sounded a lot better on paper than in practice, and yeah, even for PvP, PvE, PvP, B or C tier for Spiteful Blood. All right, again, catch you guys on the next one. Peace.